Thanks very much for the opportunity for Jill and I to present at this conference. As outlined in my bio, I'm a physiotherapist, and over the last 10 years, I've taught more than 2,500 people an innovative new body-based self-care technique that is consistently showing results that are obvious, immediate, and measurable. It's called TRE, and it deliberately invokes what are referred to in the literature as unclassified therapeutic tremors. Now, everyone here is already well aware of the problems that personnel and veterans are facing with PTSD. And we're also well aware that there's a number of factors involved, including moral injury and also the loss of community and purpose that many people experience once they're no longer in service. But the sad reality is that despite our best efforts so far, 2/3 of those people who develop PTSD are not going to make a full recovery using our existing evidence-based practices. We also know that post-traumatic stress and cumulative trauma are not simply psychological conditions, but full systemic disorders that affect the functioning of the autonomic nervous system and the somatic system as well. So the problems that personnel and veterans are facing includes a full spectrum of mental and physical health conditions. We also know that movement and exercise have a critical role to play in the recovery from PTSD. Groundbreaking Australian research showed that adding an exercise program to traditional treatment approaches significantly augmented their effects. A 2019 meta-analysis showed that body and movement-orientated interventions seem to be effective at reducing the symptoms of PTSD. And it's worth noting that the original PhD dissertation by TRE founder Dr. David Berselli showed that adding tremors to an exercise routine had a greater impact on reducing anxiety than just using the exercise routine alone. In order to make sense of why this might be the case, we need to take a neurobiological view of resilience, which is ultimately the capacity of the nervous system to upregulate in order to meet a challenge or a stressor, the capacity to endure that stressor for as long as is required, and most importantly, the ability to fully downregulate afterwards. And it's this inability to fully downregulate the neurobiology of the body which is the missing link in our current efforts to prevent post-traumatic stress and cumulative trauma. This graph shows a polyvagal model of our body's defense cascade, from a calm and relaxed ventral vagal state at the bottom, through the sympathetically aroused states of fight and flight, and all the way up into the dorsal vagal mediated immobilization response, where the body needs to find a way to contain its underlying impulse to move. Now, we know these responses are autonomic and they're not consciously mediated. So wouldn't it make sense that the human body would have also evolved with similar subcortical processes to release these defensive responses afterwards? And that's where spontaneous involuntary movements fit in. Dumping adrenaline, releasing neuromuscular bracing, down-regulating the autonomic nervous system, and restoring the neurobiology of the body and our mind along with it to a calm, relaxed, and balanced state. So with TRE, we use the latest understandings in neuroscience to reframe this shaking reflex as a positive recovery resource and teach people how to deliberately invoke it in a safe and controlled way.
This video is a great example of 6 different people from around the world who have activated the tremor mechanism by doing the tension and trauma releasing exercises. This man is a fireman from Brazil. He was in a workshop with 250 other policemen and firemen. You could see he's simply laying passively on the floor after he's activated the tremor mechanism. Here's an example of a community leader from an indigenous population. He's learning the exercises so he can guide his community through the exercises as they experience stress, traumas, and anxieties. Now here is a military policeman who activated the tremor mechanism, and you could see that they're going through his legs into the pelvis and into his lower back. This next policeman, who's a civil policeman, was at the same workshop. And then at the end, they simply lay their legs down and relax.
But without this neuroeducation, spontaneous shaking and trembling continues to be misunderstood and stigmatized by personnel as one of the ultimate signs of weakness. If your body starts to shake when you're cold, you'll be expected to pull yourself together and toughen up. If you find yourself shaking after a traumatic event, you'll definitely try to contain it because you'll think you're in shock, that it's a symptom of PTSD, and that it's a sign that you're not coping and falling apart. Now, this ability to override shaking is also seen as one of the ultimate measures of mental strength during physical fitness training. And to be clear, it is a skill that can be required at times in order to perform under pressure. But we don't have a problem teaching ADF personnel how to harden up and override their body's responses. We have a problem teaching them how to fully soften down afterwards. And that's precisely what this technique is offering them.
When I learned this technique, I was convinced that I needed to tell it to everyone that I could ever talk to, any veteran that I met that I knew that was struggling.
The first time I did it, very skeptical. I'd been through enough treatments that didn't work. I was not so gullible, but it did work, and it was pretty easy to learn, but it had a profound impact. These simple exercises were doing wonders for me. I slept the first night I did it.
If I would have known TRE then, in Kosovo or in Afghanistan, if my team would have known it when we were deployed, we could use it once a week, once every second day, discharge that stress, instead of growing a bit numb and taking larger, bigger risks.
The trauma release exercise pretty much saved my life. It saved my relationship when I was struggling.
Does it cost anything? Once you learn it, you have it for the rest of your life, and you can share it with everyone you know. I will do everything I can do to make sure the military looks at this, studies it, evaluates it, and inculcates it into our warriorship. It's a missing component. It's a missing link to completing the cycle of warriorship so that you can own your experience and not be owned by it.
Now, there are many types of pathological tremors that have been well researched, but what hasn't been studied is this shaking and trembling response in the direct aftermath of stress and trauma. So, for lack of a clear definition, the tremors invoked by TRE are referred to in the literature as unclassified therapeutic tremors, because unlike pathological tremors, these tremors can be consciously turned on and off at will. In our medical model, shakes and tremors are already well recognised and associated with a number of mental health conditions. But despite no research into the phenomenon, and without any consideration for the potential role in the recovery process, they continue to be pathologised and even medicated against as a symptom of panic attacks, anxiety, and PTSD. When we consider the potential effects of inhibiting this natural recovery response, we can see that it may inadvertently be contributing to many of the negative outcomes that veterans and personnel are currently experiencing, where chronic muscular bracing leads to a permanently dysregulated autonomic nervous system that has lost its capacity to fully downregulate and relax, where alcohol, substance abuse, gambling, and medications become the only mind-numbing options available to try to cope with the unresolved tension still residing in the neurobiology of the body below the level of our conscious control and long after the external battle is over. And it is this ongoing cycling between states of numbness, depression, and withdrawal on the one hand, and anger, anxiety, and hyperarousal on the other, which is the very definition of PTSD. Now, to be clear, TRE is not magically going to solve all these problems, but it does provide a missing piece of the puzzle in our efforts to understand and address the underlying neurobiology of PTSD and cumulative trauma. Around the world, evidence for TRE is emerging. To provide a few examples, US Veterans Affairs are currently in the third year of a controlled clinical trial using TRE for the treatment of PTSD. In 2019, Jill and I published a case study showing significant improvements in perceived stress levels and capacity to cope with life stresses for an Australian veteran with chronic PTSD. In 2018, I was involved in research at Monash Uni that showed TRE has a positive impact on reducing restless leg syndrome, a common comorbid presentation of PTSD. And other peer-reviewed research has also shown that TRE is highly feasible as a self-care technique to improve the quality of life from non-professional caregivers. While we do need clinical trials to research this phenomenon, at the individual level, we can already measure the immediate impacts of TRE using wearable technologies that monitor sleep quality and heart rate variability. You can see in the top graph the ongoing impact that daily TRE practice had on the overnight heart rate variability of a 39-year-old elite performance coach. And in the bottom graph, the immediate impact on the sleep quality of a middle-aged male with complex PTSD who had learnt TRE at a 2-day public workshop. Now, I'm not showing you these images to try to prove the efficacy of TRE, but to show you that we don't need to wait 5 to 10 years for randomized controlled clinical trials before we're able to show the benefits of this process at the individual level. And this is where the real potential for TRE actually lies. Not just as a treatment for PTSD after the fact, but as a body-based resilience training to help prevent PTSD in the first place. Now, TRE doesn't replace CBT or calming techniques such as mindfulness or progressive muscle relaxation. But because the movements are subcortically generated, they seem to be able to downregulate the autonomic nervous system in a significantly different way to consciously directed techniques, thereby providing an additional body-based entry point to self-regulate the autonomic nervous system that also tends to support and enhance the effect of our existing approaches. In Australia, we already have AFL footballers, professional surfers, and elite volleyballers using TRE and similar tremoring techniques. So the process is not stigmatized as a mental health technique, but seen as something that supports recovery and enhances elite performance. Now, this is in direct alignment with key recommendations from the When Helping Hurts report. Prioritizing approaches with the potential to prevent PTSD, empowering personnel to mobilize their own innate coping resources, and shifting the focus from preventing illness to optimizing well-being and performance. Now, Jill and I are just two of thousands of TRE providers who are pioneering this technique all around the world. Over the last 15 years, an estimated 5 million people have learnt TRE, and there are professional certification trainings in more than 60 countries. In addition to first responders, TRE has already been introduced to veterans and defence personnel in a number of countries who consistently report they like the technique for a few key reasons. Firstly, it can be used anywhere at call in as little as 5 to 10 minutes, simply lying on the ground or even in bed at night to assist with getting to sleep. It also takes almost no mental focus or physical effort, so it's easy and efficient when personnel are most fatigued and least likely to undertake more demanding self-care practices such as mindfulness or general exercise. And because it's body-based and performance-focused, it's stigma-free and it bypasses the need to always be expected to talk about it. Now, if we look at evaluations of TRE resilience training by frontline health workers and survivors of major trauma all around Australia, people consistently report the same results. TRE has immediate calming effects. It is as effective, if not more effective, than other forms of resilience training they have done. People are highly likely to continue using TRE after the training, and it is almost unanimously recommended for other staff in their organisations. Rather than waiting for clinical trials of TRE as a treatment approach to be conducted overseas, there's an opportunity here in Australia to create world-leading research into the use of TRE as a preventative technique. To this end, I propose the first step is to conduct a pilot trial to allow a significant number of veterans and personnel at different stages of their career to evaluate this training for themselves, so that should they recommend it, in direct alignment with best practice principles outlined in the When Helping Hurts report, they can then be involved in the design, delivery, and evaluation of any subsequent rollout. And this image of US Air Force cadets learning TRE as part of their performance under stress training shows just how easily and cost effectively this training can be provided in a large group setting. Thanks once again for the opportunity to present at this conference. We hope this information has been useful and you are inspired to contact us to help create a pathway forwards for this innovative new approach.